As many as you know. I was telling Tricia last night, I was thinking about changing the title, since we are in California here, to Dude, Where's My Data? But I think your talk was wonderful, by the way. I'm just telling the last speaker that I really enjoyed it. I think all of us did. And I think we brought up a lot of really important issues that all of us think about all the time. So let me just start with an initial slide, which tells all of you nothing new. As we know, this is a thrilling time in the data community. It's pretty clear that virtually everywhere you look, data is driving 21st century innovation. And for those of us in the research community, it's certainly clear that virtually every area is really taking advantage of the ubiquity and the amount of research data available. But that's also true in literally every other aspect of life. There's a broad spectrum of goods and services. Black Friday is now being replaced by Cyber Monday, as we all know, because of the amount of data available to us. We've heard just a very compelling talk about transformative strategies for disease treatment. Data is really informing the safety and security of our world, and also presenting great vulnerabilities, as we all know, because everything is kind of a double-edged sword. We're thinking about smart buildings, smart lighting, smart infrastructure in various ways, and all of that is driven by data. So it is a data-driven world. And part of the challenge for us is learning how to live in a data-rich world versus a data-poor world, and all the things we want to do. Now, for those of us in this audience, it's absolutely clear that without infrastructure, there is no data. So data infrastructure is absolutely critical to support data-driven innovation. And infrastructure, we need a broad spectrum of things, tools and software systems, ways to access the data via portals and various other websites, systems, services, algorithms, analytics, frameworks, visualization, ways of storing our data, ways of preserving our data, human beings that need to be providing data expertise in all kinds of ways. So that data infrastructure is really the foundation on which our data-driven innovation, our data-driven world moves. Now, what can we do as a community to accelerate the development of effective data infrastructure in the 21st century? You kind of think about, all of these sort of blossoms are really, based on data infrastructure. And if you look at it kind of closely, we often talk about the technical infrastructure about that. Our software and our systems, our tools, our algorithms, hardware, facilities, etc. But that infrastructure has a very important component, which you can kind of think of as social infrastructures. Those are the agreements we make with each other around policy, around practice, around standards, around rights, around culture. And in fact, this whole kind of data-driven ecosystem is then enhanced and nurtured by a whole bunch of other things. Stewardship of that data, sustainability of that data, economic support of that data. So if we want to look at a thriving ecosystem with respect to data, we have to look at all of those things. Now, one thing you might ask is, in the world of physical infrastructure, what works? What have we used to kind of create that social infrastructure, the stewardship, etc.? And a terrific report by Jeff Bowker, which many of you are very aware of, from 2007, really tried to understand infrastructure in the cyber world based on what we know about infrastructure in the physical world. We want that infrastructure to be ubiquitous, we want it to be accessible, we want it to be reliable, transparent, etc. So what techniques do we use for physical infrastructure? And we use a whole bunch of different things, which you will readily recognize. So for those of you that are visiting us in the US, you know that your plugs do not work in every country in the world, and we know that when we visit you as well. We are not waiting for the Esperanto, on high development of the universal plugs. We just bring our little bag of plug adapters wherever we go, so we can read our email in every hotel room we go to. We are looking for easy, low barrier to access interoperability between all these different systems. What else do we use? If you go down south, if you have a little time, and you go to Disneyland and you want to ride the roller coaster, you'll see the sign, you must be this tall to ride. We use policy to help us understand when the infrastructure is suited for us. If I'm 2 feet high, I can't ride that roller coaster because it's not safe for me. So that oftentimes our infrastructure doesn't apply to everybody, it applies to some people, and we use policy to really help us understand that. There are common standards. If I want to build a house, I go to Home Depot or the international equivalent of Home Depot. I can buy a 2x4 or bolts of a certain type, or I can look at my electrical systems using certain sets of standards. We have that so we can make agreements so we can build things together. So those standards are very useful for us as a community. Sustainable economics. I want to wait at the bus stop and have my bus come. My bus system has to have an economic model that helps it continue to deliver services for the public good. And same thing with community practice. So I get out there on my road and not absolutely every situation is covered by the motor vehicle code. But our practice, the agreements we make with each other, helps us try to stay out of accidents and avoid being bumper cars out there. Every single one of those techniques are techniques that we can and do use in the cyber world for data infrastructure, and there are things that we are going to be using more often. So today, I actually wanted to talk about two things. Two emerging efforts in the development of effective data infrastructure, and I wanted to focus on the global perspective, talk a little bit about Research Data Alliance and other things, and then I wanted to come back here to the US and talk about some exciting and very challenging things that are coming up with publicly accessible research data. Let's start with the first. So it's pretty clear wherever you look, and we heard just a really compelling example of that in the last talk, many examples of that, is that data sharing drives new discovery. And it's not just true for the life sciences, it's true for everywhere. It's true for astronomers, it's true for legal experts, it's true for social scientists, it's true for chemists, it's pretty much true for everyone. And what we're finding is this wealth of data really makes a difference. And sometimes you're looking at sharing data from communities that are not your community. There's a digital anthropologist that I know who is looking at the incidence of asthma in various cities around the world. And she and her colleagues are combining health data, data on where the infrastructure is, data on air quality, hospital admissions. These are data sets that she's combining to answer complex questions about whether you're more at risk to get asthma in Mexico City or Los Angeles. So data sharing really does drive new discovery. Now, that's not just true in the US, that's true everywhere. If you look all around the world, you see amazing movements in each country to try to support from a national level, from a community level, data sharing in various areas and various countries, etc. And if you look at professional communities, librarians, data scientists, humanities scholars, cyber infrastructure professionals, etc., there's a lot of support among data sharing for them. So data sharing is important. Data sharing is important to a great deal of cohorts, and data sharing is important to communities. So the other trend you see, and this has been a trend for clearly a long time, is that communities come together to build infrastructure and increase their impact. And you've seen this in a wide variety of things. 25 years ago, the internet was started because a community came together and tried to create standards about what that would look like. Were they perfect? No, they were not perfect. Did they give us something that created the internet that we marvel at today? They did. Also true of, in the health sciences, as we've heard about, the protein data bank, over 40 years old. Because of policy, that's social infrastructure that was developed by NIH and professional journals. What we found is that people deposit things in the protein data bank. It's been an incredible asset to researchers all over the world. We're starting to see more public access data collections like we heard before. NIH is creating policy, the Alzheimer's community, the autism community, etc. And then for those of us in the computer science community, we came together as well many, many years ago to create the message passing interface communication protocols for parallel machines. that enabled us to do a whole set of programming around supercomputers, parallel computers, etc. Was it perfect? None of these are perfect. You know, is it satisfying a need for a particular use case or a particular community? Yes, they are doing that. So communities are coming together to increase their impact. There are things that you can do as a community that are more than you can do as an individual, as a project, etc. And so that's the value of community. So you've got data sharing all over the world in communities. Well, all of that began about a year and a half ago, something called the Research Data Alliance. And the Research Data Alliance is a group that is officially almost a year old, not even quite a year old. And it's a global community-driven organization which was launched in March 2013 in Gothenburg, Sweden, to accelerate data-driven innovation. So what is the Research Data Alliance about? It is not about boiling the ocean. It's about building social, organizational, and technical infrastructure to reduce barriers to data sharing and exchange, and development and accelerate the development of global infrastructure, coordinated, not one infrastructure for everyone, but coordinated global data infrastructure. So what's the basic idea? And the basic idea is to create stuff, adopt stuff, and use stuff. And the idea is that RDA, Research Data Alliance members, come together in two ways. They either come together as working groups. These are very specific groups. The working groups last about a year and a half or so. They have a specific piece of infrastructure. They're creating that. They're building it. They're adopting it. And folks are using it. That's the intent, is for folks to use it. And then they move on and do something else. We also have people coming together as interest groups, which are much longer live groups. They're looking at, you know, what kind of infrastructure shall we build? What does this community need? So they're looking at a variety of different really important questions that then often spit off working groups. The working groups focus on the development of tools, of policy, of software infrastructure, standards of practice, and they're adopted and used. They're efforts that have applicability to some group, but they don't have to have applicability to absolutely everybody. And they're efforts for which we can start today. So this is kind of the just do it equivalent of creating infrastructure. And if you think about it, you know, if I go to a country, you know, where there is no plug adapter, this allows me to sort of create a plug adapter. If somebody else can use that plug adapter in their country, that's great. But at the very least, I can read my email with a specific thing. So Research Data Alliance is really helping people build infrastructure. That infrastructure supports data sharing and exchange. Now, there's lots of different kinds of infrastructure the RDA community is building. And I'll show you in a little bit a slightly old, because things change really fast in this organization, slide on what people are working on. But they're working on a wide variety of things, from really fundamental stuff like digital object identifiers, the various data services, common metadata standards, the preservation of sustainable models, etc. Citation, etc. So, you know, these are the things that we all know and love, and we know as the infrastructure that is fundamental to be able to share and exchange data, to be able to get the most out of data, and to get the most out of data-driven innovation. This stuff is important. Without this stuff, we can't maximize the potential of data in the 21st century. What's the RDA community look like? Well, it's been quite a whirlwind ride, and I know many of you are members of RDA, so thank you very much for, you know, all of the effort you put into this organization. If you're not a member of RDA, you want to be, all you have to do is, you know, it's free. You go to the website, you sign up, and say you believe in openness and transparency and a bunch of things that you believe in anyway, and you're a member of RDA, so we welcome you. So as of 2/14, I thank Mark Parsons for giving me this slide. The current RDA community has over 1,300 members from 64 countries. As you can see right now, it's dominated by North America region and European region, but other regions of the world are coming up. And this time when I looked at the countries, there are a variety of countries that we haven't seen before who've joined the RDA. It's interesting that our number of academics is falling slightly, that we've gone from a little bit higher, the upper, you know, 60%, we're seeing more government people, more private sector, and of course other means we don't know because it's gmail.com or something like that. We don't know where they're from. So you're seeing all sectors represented in the RDA and a variety of places all around the world. Where these people meet typically are at the RDA plenaries. So the ones in blue we've had already, and the ones in red are upcoming in 2014. Our first plenary was in Gothenburg, Sweden. It was thrilling to see how many different members of the data community, how many different cohorts were there. We had about 240 participants. We had 3 working groups at that time and about 9 interest groups. And plenary 2 was Washington, D.C., here in the U.S. We had almost 400 participants. We had essentially double the number of working groups and interest groups. I think we're on that sort of doubling thing, so I expect roughly that much when we go to plenary 3, which will be in Dublin, Ireland at the end of this month. Plenary 2 also saw sort of a growth in the use of the RDA plenary as a community town hall. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We had a data citation summit that a number of groups organized to sort of come together, and it was our first meetup. And then, of course, if you ask Ingrid, she'll tell you all about plenary 4 and the plans that they're making for the 4th plenary. We have 2 plenaries a year in the Netherlands. We hope to have the 5th plenary here back in the U.S. We'll see if our bid is accepted, and we're trying to figure out where that is now. So the RDA plenaries have been very interesting for the community, and our emerging format is really as a data community town square. Most important, these are working meetings. And because RDA is an international organization and face-to-face meetings are really important to make progress, our working groups and our interest groups spend a lot of time at RDA meeting and trying to make progress on the things that interest them. We spend some time in all-hands sessions. We get a lot of the funding folks coming and talking to us about different kinds of issues and trends and opportunities in various countries. Data organizations coming and talking about what they're doing, because RDA should complement their efforts, and the idea is to sort of work together and really promote the data community and the things we can do. And we're increasingly becoming a neutral meeting place. So it's a place that multiple different organizations could come and form common agendas, like with the Data Citation Harmonization Summit that happened last spring. And I know that a number of groups are planning on meeting in kind of adjacent meetings when we go to Dublin next month. Not an eye chart, but just to give you an idea, as of last December, and I expect the font to get a lot smaller on this slide as of the next plenary, that the groups are kind of clustering together in a variety of different ways. Some of them are focused on domains. We have a wheat interoperability group where they're looking at agriculture and agricultural productivity. We have marine data, we have materials data, we have digital history and ethnography, etc. We have very foundational groups, groups looking at PID information types or metadata. We have groups focused on stewardship, some on reference and sharing, some on community needs. So there's a wide variety of different groups, and RDA doesn't tell anyone what to do. The idea is this, because it's community driven, if the community is really feeling that they would like to do something for which infrastructure is important, RDA really provides a vehicle to come together to create that infrastructure, to have a broader set of colleagues than you might have otherwise, perhaps to have a little bit more recognition from folks who are watching the RDA and watching what's going on there. But really most important, to produce that infrastructure in order to help the community use it, really accelerate their potential for innovation and movement. We have our first deliverables coming this year. This is really exciting for all of us. Our working groups that started last March will have the first deliverables in summer and fall of this year. And so I'm really excited to see what happens. We have, for each of these groups, and I won't make this an eye chart, but there's deliverables. We have initial adopters and users, so we'll be very interested to see, how that pans out. And as we speak this week, all of these groups have been getting together in Munich to really take advantage of each other's stuff. So the really cool thing about RDA is these guys just decided that to amplify what they're doing, the other groups could use it too. That's a greater set of adopters, a greater set of users, and a way to coordinate global infrastructure. So it's thrilling, and I can't wait to see what happens after Munich. I just wanted to give a couple more slides on RDA. One is to just tell you what our essentially medium term, which is 3 to 5 year strategic goals are. And the most important thing is to do what we set out to do in the first place and create a pipeline of data sharing infrastructure efforts, adopted and used by important subsets of our community, increasing in their impact and adoption over time. The next thing we want to do is really help build and expand the data community as a whole. We want to work with other organizations. We want to work with the data community for the purpose of maximizing the potential of data sharing and exchange through the development of infrastructure. And then RDA itself wants to evolve as a useful, relevant, and agile organization. If we made something up with respect to the structure and it's not working, we're going to change it. What we want to do is really enhance everybody's time and effort and really be an organization that helps you do what you do in your day job better. So that's a really important thing for the RDA, and that's what a lot of us are trying to do. I wanted to say a little bit about the regional RDAs. And so each region kind of collects all of the RDA folks in their region and is trying to do something that's special to their region as well. And that's true for the US too. So we have RDA US. We are looking to collaborate globally and also contribute locally. And you can kind of think of this as a push-pull. So from the US members of RDA, we want to contribute to RDA international efforts and leadership and all kinds of things. We want to bring the things that we're doing within the U.S. to the broader RDA community. We want to take from RDA opportunity to kind of build the RDA data community within the U.S. And we also want to leverage and implement the RDA deliverables and amplify them within the U.S. so we get sort of more out of them. And we want to collaborate really closely with other RDA regions. And we're already talking about doing this in terms of students and early career professionals for whom it's absolutely invaluable that their network extend past their own boundaries, the boundaries of their country, the boundaries of their community, the boundaries of whichever cohorts that they're in. We have an exciting opportunity. In RDA, we actually have 2 open positions that I'll ask you to think about and let us know. Mark Parsons, who's been an absolutely phenomenal managing director for RDA US and a secretariat member, was appointed our first Secretary General of RDA. As Mark goes and does this really fantastic thing, we now have a position in Mark's old job. The RDA US Managing Director both provides executive leadership to RDA US and then works inside the Secretariat with Mark and the rest of the international team to make sure that RDA is doing well. We also have a position open for a communications specialist. This is somebody who will help the RDA US folks and also help the RDA folks around our plenaries and around the bigger stories. So if you know of anybody, point them my way. Both the open positions are on my website at our Winslow. Okay, so that's that kind of a little bit about what I wanted to say about RDA. And now I wanted to kind of move from the international to the national and talk a little bit about what's happening in the U.S. and maybe even some of the themes that the last speaker mentioned. So, one of the questions we're really looking at in the U.S. is how do we support stewardship and preservation of valuable research data? I understand everyone is looking at that. But let's take a U.S. spin on it. And one of the things that we've seen over the last few years is there is increasing federal R&D agency requirements for data management and in some sense attention to data in general. You see new programs and all of this kind of stuff. You're seeing the data management plan from NSF. You've heard a little bit about what NIH is doing, Office of Science. Pretty much every agency that does sufficient amount of R&D is starting to look at data management. Now, as we all know, management, access, and use of data now and in the future presupposes adequate stewardship and preservation of data today. And that's because infrastructure matters. Without infrastructure, there is no data. Data does not have a home, and homeless data ceases to exist. So unless we're putting some effort, some real effort, into creating sustainable data infrastructure, then we are going to be in trouble. And the research data on which we are coming to depend will not be there. it's important to have this infrastructure because everybody's asking for it. If we have the data management plans, if we say our data is valuable, we need a way to keep it. If we are now starting to see requests for public access to research data, I'll talk a bit about that. It needs infrastructure. Use and reuse of data, data has to live somewhere. Reproducibility of data has to have a home. And the bigger and the longer term and more complex our data is, the more valuable it is to us, the greater the importance of sustainable data infrastructure. So this is critical. This is critical stuff. And it's hard to sell, as you all know. In last February, things got a lot more interesting, as the last speaker mentioned. And we saw a memo from the Office of Science and Technology Policy about new policies for public access to research, publications, and data. Now we're talking data, not just publications. And, it's an interesting thing to read. Essentially, it asks all R&D agencies with over $100 billion in research expenditures to come up with strategies. Strategies should capitalize on what exists, foster public-private partnerships with scientific journals and others, enhance all our favorite words: data discoverability, data access, data dissemination, data stewardship, data preservation, to create an approach for measuring, did we do okay, enforcing compliance, and of course everybody's favorite part of this was no new money. So if you think about it, these are lean times economically for essentially everyone, certainly the research community. Now with no new money, we have to sort of build the infrastructure that supports the data for which will become publicly accessible. How do we make those decisions? So this is a challenge. This is an opportunity. It's also a challenge in the making. And of course, the New York Times did a great job of just saying it all in a much pithier way, which is we paid for the research, so let's see it. So okay. First of all of us know, I think, and the case that we have to make more broadly is that public access to data requires a viable business model for sustaining its underlying structure. And here's one way to look at it. If you think about, what's the data you can keep on your personal hard drive, and if your hard drive crashes, you're kind of okay with it. That's your locally manageable data. And, if the data has to be longer lived, or it's bigger than can fit in your hard drive, one of my colleagues from the San Diego Supercomputer Center, routinely has 200 or 300 terabytes of astrophysics data. That's not fitting on his hard drive. If it has to be coupled with data services, mosaicing, or different kinds of analytics, if you have very, very broad access or very, very restricted access covered by some policy, that's going to cost more. If there's more curation or more management and stewardship required, that's going to cost money. So as you go out from the center, this costs more money, and big data is out there too. Big data costs more money. So usage, stewardship, access requirements, perceived value, all make this a more expensive proposition. Now, data economics is not just about the cost of storage. And here's a slide from when I was at the Supercomputer Center, and we were hosting data for the community. And what we were trying to do is host different people's data collections. And of course, we had to have multiple copies because it was valuable to them. And the red stair-step line is our cost for storage, which kept going up as the number of data collections and the number of users rose. It's also true that when you're paying for data, even though the cost of storage is going down, which is very welcome in our community, the cost of other things are not. You still have to pay for power. You still have to pay for human beings. You still have to now pay for more monitoring and auditing and reporting costs and security and failover systems, etc. So it means that although the cost of storage goes down, the cost of data stewardship not necessarily going to bottom out in a place that makes it sort of pennies on the dollar. So somebody's got to pay the data bill. Somebody's got to pay the data bill. Now, why is that hard? If you look at Google and Facebook, and we're here in a really exciting area of the U.S. and of the world for infrastructure technology companies. Why doesn't Google have this problem? Why doesn't Facebook or Amazon have this problem? And the reason for this is because in the research data community, we have what you can think of as a stakeholder problem. You can think about all the stakeholders in kind of the data economics world. There are those who benefit from the data. There are those who generate, select, and create the data. There are those who own and have rights to the data, and those who manage and preserve the data. And the greater the alignment between these stakeholder groups, the greater the prospect for sustainable preservation. So if you're Google or Facebook or an IT company, you collect those clicks from the click stream. You keep those clicks. Your competitive advantage comes from analyzing those clicks. So you're taking care of them. If we're in the research community and I've got a grant from my favorite funding agency, I get that grant, from the federal folks. That grant only goes for several years. If my data is important to the community for more than those several years, who pays? And it's usually important, if it's valuable data, it's important for more than me and my colleagues. So we have a stakeholder problem, and if everybody thinks someone else is going to pay, you have a really entertaining game of stakeholder hot potato, which is not a game that anybody really wins. So because of that, one of the things I wanted to do last August, and you sort of joined me in that, is to sort of write a piece on data economics. And what we did was we wrote a piece for Science Magazine last August called "Who Will Pay for Public Access to Research Data?" We got a bunch of really great tweets on it. The not ready for public audiences one I didn't put on this one, but one of the things that amused the community is this article itself was beyond a paid firewall or paywall. The free copy is on my website, so anybody who wants to read this, go to my website, you can see the author copy. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to explore who is going to pay for public access to research data, things that are compliant with the OSTP memo. And we came up with 4 ideas to explore. And we need all of them, because the fact is that the private sector is not going to pay for this, all of it. The government is not going to pay for it, all of it. Our universities are not going to pay for it, all of it. And we are not going to pay for it, all of it. But we can share the responsibility and distribute the cost. So one thing we suggested is in the private sector companies do things for the public good all the time. They donate to the ballet, they get tax credits for being in certain areas of the country and certain cities. There's no reason that the public sector can't host some of the data as a public good, and we should be exploring that. The public sector, we've seen a lot of great high-profile data that's supported by U.S. government agencies. Clarity about what will be supported and it won't be supported, and perhaps the path from getting from one place to another, would very much help our community, because if we know something's not going to be supported, we can create the market. We can find other alternatives. So that's, I think, really important. The academic sector, our libraries and universities, our repositories are really starting to look at digital preservation, digital stewardship. They need help. They need a little jumpstart package, so they can kind of start building up capacity, building up workforce, and then kind of ramping into institutional activities and institutional bills some years down the line. And the case for all of us, and this was the most provocative of our suggestions, we pay for data all the time. I have a digital subscription to the New York Times, I donate to Wikipedia, I have various data services. It has low barrier to access. If I want to buy a Lady Gaga song from iTunes, I don't know how much it costs, it's like $1 and something, right? I'm okay with paying for that. Why am I not okay with paying $1, put it in the shopping cart like the last speaker said, for the protein data bank and the virtual observatory of the panel studying income dynamics? And so, in some sense, our community too has to sort of, think about can we take what happens in the real world and apply it to our world as well. One way or another, and I think we need to do all of these things, I think we have to distribute the cost. Okay, so a couple more slides, and I want to get back to the theme we started with, which is in terms of sustainable stewardship and infrastructure for data. Why aren't we there yet? We all know it's important. We all know it's absolutely fundamental in order to make that data available to us. And as we all know, infrastructure investments are a hard sell. If you go back to your institution, and you're trying to, get someone to up the data bill, quantifying the return on investment, that's a challenge. It's hard to market these things. The business model has to be sustainable. And it's interesting to me, if you look at supercomputer land and you look at the data thing, part of the reason for that is what we see in computers. It's all good news. I have a computer and it's at the top of the top 500 list. That means it's one of the fastest computers in the world. In data, the stuff that's newsworthy is, Target breached our security on our credit cards. We lost high-resolution, photos of the moon. Our social security numbers are missing. So in some sense, if you look at the business model between, say, supercomputers and archival storage systems, there are different metrics of success: high performance versus high reliability. The next generation systems, it's much easier to sell growth and capability than it is smooth migration. And the funding models are different. We want no gaps with respect to our data infrastructure. And this was perhaps best said by something I saw last week, where they were talking about the water mains that are breaking all over the Northeast. As you all might know, we had an incredibly cold winter. We're having an incredibly cold winter. Sub-zero temperature. This aging infrastructure is old and it's breaking. And so the mayor of Syracuse said, this is really important. It's expensive to fix this stuff. And you don't cut ribbons for new water mains, but that's what really matters. You don't cut ribbons for new data infrastructure, but that's what really matters. So I want to end up with kind of a challenge to us all, me too. And I think it's up to our community, because I think we understand this. And I think making the case for sustainable stewardship is more important now than ever. And it's important as you look into the future. The research landscape is changing. Data is accelerating everything. There's greater need for access, for use, for stewardship of data. The traditional modes of recognition are evolving. We are collaborating in new ways. We're going to the internet to buy mice and studies and all kinds of things. We're publishing in new ways. We're citing in new ways. We're analyzing in new ways. Our educational systems are changing. We're trying to figure out what should we do on-site and what should we do offline. What should we do in the big, what should we do in the small? And there's more monitoring and tracking and accountability needed everywhere. And at the end of the day, beyond the research community, the workforce is changing. Everybody needs to be more data literate. There's more data science in everything. And thanks to Harvard Business Review, we all have the sexiest jobs in the 21st century. So who can go wrong? So it's up to us to really redouble our efforts, because I know we have all been working hard at making the case. But this case is an important one to make, and I think it's really important for all of us. So I thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Fran. I know we're running just a little bit late. I think we probably have time for one brief question, if it also has a brief answer.
Yeah,
just wait for my
both of us.
Thanks, Fran. That was terrific. I think part of the challenge that you didn't touch on as much is that these really are common pool resources, as the economists would say. And common pool resources have two fundamental problems. They've got to be governed, and they're subject to free riders.
Yes.
Is RDA going to help us with a governance model? I mean, how are we going to govern these things? And this is the community that's got to work through the governance issues.
So RDA is going to work on what we all decide it's going to work on. So RDA is us. So there's no top-down. RDA is going to work on this area, this area. RDA would be thrilled if people would come and work on these issues using RDA as a vehicle. And I think that's right, but I think there are things we do as a public good. And data is in a very interesting space where it's both, can be made profitable, it needs to be, there's parts of it that need to be made as a public good, and we need to kind of find a framework, in some sense a loose framework that helps us use it in most ways. And so, many hours in response to your question, but I'm trying to be respectful for time.
Okay. Thank you again to Fran and to